the contract, if at all.
Yeah.
Brent Zwerneman from the Houston Chronicle joins us on SicEm365 Radio. He created all of this mess. He is completely to blame on Wednesday with his blockbuster, stunning story that Oklahoma and Texas are headed eventually are talking to the SEC. Brent, have you ever been through the last type of 48 hours maybe your phone or whatever has experienced?
I have not, and I was looking forward to SEC Media Days, that day in particular, Nick Saban, Jimbo Fisher, especially Mike Leach. So I certainly wasn't anticipating that, and I have gotten a kick out of the idea that it was some well-oiled, orchestrated machine behind this with A&M, feeding me this right at the time Jimbo Fisher goes to the podium. That wasn't the case at all. In fact, I was the guy scrambling around outside the Winfrey Hotel trying to get Wi-Fi, kind of like the old days when you'd go up to these apartment complexes and try to scam some free Wi-Fi. It was me at that point. So, yeah, deal on the timing on that front. I would have preferred it to have been next week when I'm in the dog days again and looking for something to do, but I certainly wasn't going to ignore it when it came down the pipe either.
So, Brent, Ross Bjork made his point pretty clear the other day that their intention was to be the only Texas team, the SEC. That's why they left in the first place. That's why they made such a big deal of this. It does not appear that they have a whole lot of support. So how do they make this work for them moving forward, seeing as they're going to be mad because Texas is coming?
They need to appreciate how much money they're going to make with the renewing of the rivalry was my first thought. And I did see early on people were saying, well, they're going to have, you would have to have 11 of 14 yes votes to admit the two programs at that point. And there was some talk, people were saying, well, Missouri might, Arkansas might, LSU might. I didn't get that impression at all early. My thought from those programs, from those universities, was that they felt like this was going to be best for the SEC overall as the first 16-team super conference, and so that it would indeed be at minimum a 13-1 vote and maybe in the end here a 14-0 vote, with the idea of A&M realizing that, adding the old rival that they haven't played in a decade, that would be by far their biggest moneymaker every year, might in the end be an okay thing for the program, especially as they look for different ways to make money, with NIL and the expansion of the playoffs, which I thought that also played a big role, obviously, in Texas and Oklahoma deciding to make that move because they feel like they could still have those chances to make the playoffs as a member of the SEC. So, yeah, it's been kind of nuts the past 48 hours.
Brent, had you even had any type of crumbs along the way that led you to believe that something was cooking, or was this kind of just out of complete nowhere?
You had heard little things that y'all know how it is, and how it's been since about 2009. You always hear little things. But, I've pointed out lately, but just kind of with the idea of combating the idea that A&M was sitting there feeding me, this all stemmed from, it was 10 years to the day that then Texas A&M President Arbo and Lofton stepped out of the Regents meeting at A&M on the A&M campus and said, the Big 12 is in a state of uncertainty. Well, this story broke 10 years later to the day, and it all ties together because in the previous days, I had reached out to all these longtime contacts I had across leagues, not just the SEC, Big 12, some of these people I used to deal with in the old days, ones I've kept in touch with over the decades. So it stemmed from that. So, if you say, you hear things along the way, sure, but I didn't really think it was legitimate until I was flat out told it was legitimate while researching those other stories.
Brent Zwerneman from the Houston Chronicle with us. SicEm365 Radio busted the story on Wednesday. And so let's get to the facts. We know about the grant of rights. The Big 12, they had their conference call last night. I think they're going to stick to their guns. When do you think this actually happens? And do you think, is there any type of thought the SEC will go, well, wait a minute, we'll send an X amount of millions of dollars to the Big 12 to let Oklahoma and Texas leave early? Because it's not just $20 million. It could be like $200 million.
Right. Yeah, and my initial gut reaction when all this first started coming down was, and it was from the discipline of a decade ago and seeing A&M go through this, and then Missouri along the way, was that A&M, when they first were leaving the Big 12 to go to the SEC, the idea, and I know y'all remember this, it was going to be they would enter in a couple years, that they would be in the Big 12 for the next couple years and then enter the SEC. Well, that quickly accelerated when everybody realized how awkward it would be, how weird it would be to have this lame duck program as part of your league that planned to leave. And so things accelerated. Next thing you know, within a year, A&M is officially joining the SEC and playing an SEC schedule in 2012. I could see that happening in this situation because everything is negotiable in that sense. I probably like to keep things together through 2025. But then on the flip side, you say, okay, these 8 remaining teams, if they have options, say, with the Pac-12 or so forth to make their own super conference, then, hey, why not jump on it and get a deal done and get these things moving along? So that would be my gut feeling. I don't have any insight on that, but having seen it played out a decade ago, I could certainly see that situation happening again in this case.
We were just talking about it before you got on the air. A&M was a lot more public with their disgust of what was going on, and tried one year and it didn't really go, and then the next year finally were able to pull the trigger. What are the biggest differences you see between A&M leaving for the SEC and Texas and OU doing it?
A&M leaving for the SEC at that
10
time?
years ago. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it's pretty similar in the situations of wanting to kind of join a very stable, obviously the most powerful football conference in the nation, and thinking forward in the sense of, bottom line is, and we all know this, it's always about money, right? And longest term stability, longest term financial payouts is probably going to be as a super conference in the SEC. That was Texas A&M's thinking a decade ago when at that time they used the Longhorn network as the excuse, but everyone kind of knew that was just the trigger or the excuse to try to get out because of the kind of the year in, year out instability of the Big 12. And frankly, they also wanted to get out from Texas's shadow. So I know a lot of Aggies aren't real pleased with the idea that suddenly they're going to be reunited in another conference. But I also say those Aggies are also going to be the first ones in line for tickets for the renewing of the rivalry.
The vote, which you said could end up being 14-0, the SEC rarely ever has something that's just a majority. They love to be all together as one. Do you think they'll remain that way with Texas and Oklahoma joining the fray?
I do, because I think, Oklahoma and in particular Texas is going to have to realize that, they're part of something much bigger at this point. And I've seen it firsthand with A&M in the past decade in terms of them being part of this massive league. And of course, I've loved the road environments on Saturday afternoons in the fall. And I do think you're talking about there's different Texas leadership now in place than a decade ago. There's, obviously a different coach and so forth. So I know that they're going to be wary of that long-standing Longhorns arrogance or whatever you want to call it. But I do think that they also get that they're part of something much bigger at this point as well.
Brent, the next move as far as what happens, obviously this is them reaching out, vice versa. The reports are out. You had this from the beginning. Everyone else can do whatever they want, but you pop this back on Wednesday. What happens now, do you think? What's the next thing that occurs? And if there is a next thing other than just the obvious?
Yeah, it's a bunch of the legalese type stuff, the red tape, everything we saw play out 10 years ago. And again, I feel fortunate to have covered that up close and personal because you can kind of see it happening again. It comes down to all these meetings and finally they have the vote. And then from then it becomes a formality and you might have the threats of lawsuits and litigations, which y'all are familiar with from 10 years ago. That's right. And then at some point they kind of realize, well, there's really not a whole lot we can do about this. And maybe some lawmakers and some who are adamantly opposed to this, even from the Longhorns side, will feel like there's some things that can be done. But I just feel like this train is kind of too far down the tracks. And that's why in the original story, it said that my insider had said that this could happen. The announcement could happen even within 2 weeks of that time. So it was pretty far down the road already at that point.
Brent, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Incredible job with what you did back on Wednesday. And I know that's got to be one of those where you're like, okay, send, submit, send. What do you do? And you just triple check, and you're a pro. And great job creating what has been the biggest story basically in sports in a week that the Olympic Games are going on. Thanks for your time.
Yeah, you bet. I appreciate it. I'm glad I have a boss who quadruple checked me too, so I felt pretty good by the time we hit send. Y'all, thanks for having me on.
All right, that's Brent Zwerneman. His actual name completely spelled out on his Twitter feed, covers A&M and more for the Houston Chronicle. I'm surprised that Paula didn't get the joke. I said the evil reporter who started all of this crazy. That's a joke. That's just a joke. I mean, it's
what Abraham Lincoln said to, oh my gosh, and now I'm forgetting her name, the lady who wrote Uncle Tom's Cabin, when he met her, was, "You're the little lady who wrote the little book who started this big war." That's kind of maybe how Brent might feel today. Although he didn't start the war, he just reported on it, and it's so strange that this continues to happen to me. I mean, I get it. I keep hoping. I guess I'm naive, and I've never found myself to be naive, but I just keep hoping that it'll stop, but it's not going to. Until they get to what they really, all these power schools, what they really, really want, it's not going to stop.
Yeah, no, and it's there's going to be something else, because guess what? When there's an earthquake, that's not the only part of Earth that moves. There's others that come along the way, and other buildings that were damaged, but you don't know it. And then all of a sudden they fall, or things that happen along the way. It's 254-339-1122.